two respective works. In this case, it's according to what, which is, I think, quite extraordinary for many reasons. One of which is that he starts making the first sketches of According to What in Japan. He first paints Watchman, that you will find in Philadelphia, but you will see also in Philadelphia the sketches of According to What that he creates later. And According to What is a sort of summation of everything that he had been doing before, but it's also his love letter to Marcel Duchamp. Duchamp also makes the prints for According to What after the painting, so, and a drawing after the painting. So he reverses the way in which art is traditionally work in terms of the relationship between drawings and painting. I think that Duchamp was truly pleased with the attention that he was receiving from Rauschenberg and Jones. And I think he did feel a special affinity for Jones. He showed it.
So I get started in this gallery. I had nothing to add to Carlos's erudition about Duchamp. But here we can talk about another pair of galleries, which are two that the Leo Castelli Gallery, which was his longtime dealer from the 50s for more than 35 years. For those of you who've been to Philadelphia, you're really interested in the idea of, as part of this retrospective, having our own ideas about exhibition making, but also looking carefully at how Johns himself made an exhibition and presented his new work. And what was the setting like? What was the interrelationship between the paintings? What was the relationship between the paintings and the architecture of the gallery, which is quite different than you find in a major museum today. So this room is almost exactly the same size as that gallery, and if you go to the Michael Werner Gallery in the Upper East Side today, you can see it. It was on the second floor of a townhouse. We had to make a little bit of adjustments for egress and add a door.
Only one door, so imagine
only one door, and what the original ceiling height was. And you'll notice that the paintings are hung lower in this room than any of the other rooms, which is how Johns originally hung them, kind of low to the floor. And the hall that you just passed through includes pictures of what that gallery looked like, and we also show pictures of them in Philadelphia. And it's interesting to me in this gallery, we're getting a little later in our story, now we're at the late 1960s, and there's such a long discussion, of course, about how Johns influenced pop artists and even minimal artists and serial art that happened in the mid-1960s, which is absolutely true. But I kind of like to think when I look at this gallery that he is now taking ideas and inspiration from artists who he had in fact inspired, and this kind of reciprocal dialogue of art. At the Leo Castelli Gallery, between the time he had his first show in 1968, many important shows happened of Warhol's work, of Frank Stella's work, where the paintings would have been conceived almost like a set, either in relation to each other or the room, or sometimes both. That's not how people traditionally think of Johns's, quote, exhibition making. He kind of works interior to the canvas and then brings these individual objects into the space of the room, unlike maybe some of the artists I've worked with at the Whitney, like Wade Guyton or Laura Owens, let's say, where they sort of think of making paintings for a mise-en-scène, and which are repeated, and even this reference to the flagstone of a wall that recurs. So he's almost working on a like mural-like surround that is, I think, one of the exciting things about doing this show and trying to present the work in a new way is that if you did a more, traditional, more greatest hits Jasper Johns show, maybe you would only see a couple of these paintings and you kind of have to move on. And here we've had the depth and the space to really dig into these ideas and show some of the paintings that are less well-known or even more well-known paintings like Harlem Light in a different context.
And the other interesting thing about both shows, I mean, it's amazing how the imagery is completely different, but the structure of the shows is exactly the same in terms of the permutation of the motifs that he uses. So now, we are, many of us, and it's hard to see, but that basically, the pattern of the window, which is impressed there, appears here. You see the flagstones there, here. But that combines it with the seal screen in white, which appears 3 times there. So when you start thinking about the different parts and how they're recombined here, it's almost dizzying, the effect, right? It's like these paintings have a sense of being, it's like kaleidoscopic was the way in which it was described by one. There's a sense of fluidity and transformation that goes throughout the work, and this is what was so important for us to show. So this shows us
like that, because we've been so deep in it. But I wonder how that would
should
strike
interview
people.
some of the viewers.
Yeah, it would be that'd be a great story too.
But it's really great to see this and understanding some of that. This is more schematic than Philadelphia, but it's also a great guide. I think that the shows function as guides to each other.
And in the next gallery, it's also a slightly smaller one with the sculpture in the middle, so just be careful with your bags and backs against the works of art. So the idea behind this pair of galleries in Philadelphia and New York is to show a sort of different side of Johns as a printmaker. You saw in the opening wall, and we mentioned the Roly Holy Over Gallery, that treat primarily edition prints. And when people think about printmaking, they often think about how it replicates things in kind of two ways. It replicates an image, often from the world, a different kind of example, and it also replicates itself. You see many examples of a print, let's say if it's an edition of 20, that are meant to be all alike one another. But one of the kind of marvelous and super interesting things about Johns' printmaking practice is that throughout his career, he has been engaged in what we call unique prints, which means a print that there isn't a second exact duplicate of. And those have taken different forms. Some are part of the process of arriving at a final print. Those are called working and trial proofs in his literature. And this room is showing monotypes, which are prints that have no fixed matrix, where he draws directly on a plate and then runs it through the press. So at Philadelphia, we've explored working and trial proofs, and here we're exploring monotypes. And in a way, that's a complement to, or a kind of flip side of those edition prints. And Johns has kept all of those. He signs them. He considers them actual works of art. They're not just kind of throwaway things that some artists might discard of. And here you see this kind of amazing suite of Savarin monotypes from our collection at the Whitney. And if you look closely at some of them, you'll see a kind of gray background. And that's because this print began with discarded prints from an edition that had a Savarin can on top. And the paper, and it's just an incredibly exciting and inventive series of works. Sometimes he runs the same plate again on top of a different piece of paper, like you see here, where the first one he's printing on top of the discarded print, and the second on a plain white page. In that corner, you see what's called a counterproof, where he actually uses a recently printed flipped. Again, that mirroring and reversal that happens everywhere in this show. And if you dive deep into this work, you can see this incredible experimentation that's happening in the life of the studio and the print shop that we find so interesting.
And the profound challenge to the very process of printmaking, which is set to repeat, to make something that is unique. And that's what you find constantly in the work. I mean, he uses a medium almost against itself to augment its expressive content. And he uses one medium to think about another medium. And there's always, working against the grain, but in order to increase the expressive potential of the mediums.
Thank you. Let's go into the next gallery. Yes. Mirroring and doubling is not the theme of our show, but the organizing principle to structure the relationship between the two cities. However, we thought it was important to have one gallery at each venue that played with this idea of mirroring and doubling, in a way, indicate the kind of conceptual hinge of the exhibition and a little bit where our organizing premise came from in Johns' work. We had a lot of fun with these two galleries. I loved color, or one that transposes kind of figure ground elements. And on these two walls, you have works that are bilaterally symmetrical, another form of mirroring that's internal to the picture. And at the center of the gallery, we both have, Carlos slightly off-center, one of the two editions of the painted bronze ale cans, which of course present these imperfect doubles of one another, and of course, an endlessly reproducible cycle of Valentine ale cans. So we had a lot of fun designing this space. I think we wanted to do something that felt a little uncanny, maybe the more traditional, so to speak. Someone asked if you could speak up a little too, by the way.
Sure. In the 1980s, there's a completely different set of motifs that enter the work. And Johns starts working much more with things that can be connected to the figure and figuration. Again, the figure, traditionally is associated with fixed meanings. We, for example, a very common example would be a portrait of somebody. It's a portrait. The portrait is a sort of signifier, and what is signified is the person itself. But the way in which Johns worked with the figure is completely destabilizing. You see that in two large sets of works. We organize them according to the way in which in an evocative way. I mean, we chose to use the word nightmare for the work in Philadelphia, in which you can actually feel a certain sense of oppression and the impending death. And there's many figures of that are tracings of the Eisenheim altarpiece by Grunwald, which.
Now here, the Comedy Gallery, the Dreams Gallery, and Philadelphia, one of my favorite galleries between all the museums, both museums. It's so moving. And I think when we talk about trying to kind of reinvent Johns' work or get beyond some of their received readings, this is a good place to look at that, because many books and shows have been written or made dissecting all of the different details in this work, talking about the iconography. People have done amazing scholarship to, talk about the Picasso painting there and Grunewald and whatever. And in some way, we didn't want to organize these galleries around those images. We didn't want to make this about Johns as a kind of image sampler, although of course he is. We wanted to get to a place that felt more emotional and kind of open-ended. Where do these works take you beyond their references? And, in Philadelphia, it feels like a very dark place. Here, we obviously made kind of lighter walls that are blue and curving to kind of evoke this reverie. But this was kind of one of the ways Johns' work sometimes can feel a little bit academic to people if they worry that they don't understand all of these references. And we wanted to give people a really visceral sensation of his work, something that maybe you could get right away when you walked in the room, a feeling from it.
And you see again how they work in a kaleidoscopic manner. And about the colors, there's something quite, I'm going to share with you an anecdote, which is, there's a painting in Philadelphia called The Five Postcards, which has very bright colors. When I first saw it, I said, I was enamored by the beautiful colors, and I said, Jasper, this is a very joyful series. And he looks at me and says, well, it's very happy. And he looks at me and says, well, it has happy colors. So don't be misguided. I think that there's happy colors here, but profoundly the sense of sorrow and loss and deep, the deep sense of something that is a deep sense of transformation and rumination pervades his works as well.
Yeah, and this is a great place to also just dwell again on the work on paper being such a significant aspect of this show. You can see it's sharing space with the painting so beautifully. I think one of the great revelations to us during our research was the publication of the catalog raising of drawings, which included so many works that had never been published before or exhibited. And I remember, I'll tell another Johns anecdote, saying to Jasper, well, how come you never told us about some of these things? And he said, well, you never asked. And I said, well, how would I ask to see something that I don't know existed? And he said to be able to see these things and for him to make it possible for us to show really anything we asked for that had not been exhibited. He never said no. And so on this wall, you see a few of those works on paper, and also different sides of Johns' drawing practice with pastel, which is maybe not as well known to people. Certainly watercolor is not something one associates as much as the ink on plastic. And the use of watercolor around these kind of dreamy or nightmarish images is so interesting because it's a medium that's hard to control. And so the surrealistic aspect of chance and how the material kind of congeals on the paper is related in a way to the landscape he's creating in the mind. I think we should go to the
Sounds
next
like he
gallery.
has a real whimsical side.
He does, yes. I think that's true.
Can you send me the name?
As I mentioned, there's a couple galleries that don't have a pair in Philadelphia. This is one of them, and it's always a kind of difficult gallery for us to install at the Whitney to take advantage of the light because so many works can't. Excuse me, sir, could you please move your camera away from the piece? Thank you. Sorry, I just lost my thought. Oh, because of the light, we often have a hard time showing paintings, drawings, but it turns out to be a great gallery for sculpture. And interestingly, people often associate sculpture with Johns' early career in the 60s when he made things like the Savarin can and the Ale cans. But in fact, over the last 20 years, he returned to sculpture in a really important way. So this is a body of pretty recent work, or from the last chapter of his career. And Nancy, our resident Merce Cunningham expert, was just asking if I would explain a little bit about the origins of this. For those of you who are New Yorkers and go to the ballet or used to go to City Opera, you know at what was formerly known as the State Theater at Lincoln Center, a piece on the left, if you go in up the stairs, it looks quite like that piece, and that was commissioned originally by Philip Johnson for Lincoln Center in the 1960s. It's made out of sculpt metal. and through a long set of stories, which I will not recount here, and it includes the footprint of Merce Cunningham. How could I forget that important detail? In the top corner, it's a neat little point.
And a set of keys.
And a set of keys, exactly. And Johns, in the early 2000s, came to revisit that work and try to make it in a more durable material. In this case, that's aluminum. There's also a bronze version. And it really ignited this amazing body of work that involves sculpture, but also printmaking. If you see the newsprint on this, that's those words were actually silk screened onto wax as part of the sculpture, printing, painting process, all of the above, I would say. The painterly approach to
Motivation before the first casting, right? But then it ended up being at the end. It ended up. It's not in the concentrates in a private collection, but that was the first motivation. Now,
But his foot is in.
yeah.
Well, he re-impressed his foot. So in the Lincoln centerpiece, it's his foot in the 60s, and in this, it's his older foot. So you have this sense of the passage of time, actually, between these works.
And when he was doing that, when he was doing one of the cats, he looked at the back, and the back was raw, was unfinished. And you know, he was. This is really, really telling about the way in which he worked. And he told the people of the foundry, you know, why is this unfinished? You know, I mean, you don't care for your work. And they said, well, it's the back, Mr. Jones. And he said, well, I'm going to make backs that are going to be even more complex than the fronts. And this is what you get in these works, you know, which is this extreme complexity of the backs. And of course, they're all, you know, produced through recombinations of fragments, right? So you see this, each of these sculptures is unique, but they're produced through the recombination of the same elements. And all the elements come from the first class. So this in itself is a very, very succinct statement about the way in which he thinks and works. I love that idea, that the back is as important as the front.
Yeah, and if you know his early paintings by canvas, where he's kind of playing with flipping things around, and Carlos has an incredible installation of a two-sided painting that you can walk around that's edged with mirrors. So that kind of blew my mind when I came in the gallery yesterday. So we have one more gallery. We'll just stop at the front part of it, and then you can see the rest of the show more closely on your own. We're going to conclude our tour in this room. We've been doing a lot of talking. I've never done 2 press previews 2 days in a row. That's definitely new, but it's been just such a treat to actually enact this mirroring and reflecting together.
Yesterday was the press preview in
Philadelphia press preview was yesterday, yeah. So we did them back to back. And you know, I think this is a great place to stand to conclude the show because it really is a symbol of our collaboration. You're looking at one of the great John's masterpieces from Philadelphia's collection, Catenary, I Call to the Grave. And Carlos said from the start, well, that of course should be in New York because everyone here in Philadelphia knows it. And if you read the labels carefully, you'll find also works from the Whitney's collection, like a wonderful numbers painting that is in Philadelphia. So, and those prints in the According to What room are also from Philadelphia. We enjoyed sharing things back and forth. So you'll notice in this room a temperature change in a lot of ways. Obviously, it's much darker than the brightly sunlit room that we left. Partly that's because of the work on paper that we've shown. Also, it's because this room is really meant to kind of dwell in a sort of darker space, metaphorically, let's say. We have in each exhibition, the last 20 years or so, thought through this idea of elegy that John's, at this point in his life, or beginning in his 70s, was really making work that was so moving and powerful, thinking about mortality, about aging, about the past. The boy that he used in the Four Seasons now seems kind of alone and in distant, and even in the colorful version that Carlos mentioned in Philadelphia, there's a kind of sadness to it. This catenary, which actually says, I call to the grave on it, which is a reference to the book of Job, has been linked to this sense of the thread of life. This version is actually about a cut-up painting of an execution of Maximilian that Degas reconstituted Manet's lost canvas, and then Jasper is joining that story. You see almost funereal markers and crosses and shrouds and new iconography or return of iconography, like this kind of figure of a Picasso image in distress in the hollow of the boy's chest. In the other room you have skeletons, you have Farley, a grieving Marine who lost his comrade in the Vietnam War. And so the introduction of this imagery that is unavoidably associated with mortality and in some cases loss, it takes us, I think, to a very somber and meditative space that we're really we're interested in exploring.
And I think that it's interesting that in Jasper I think it was T.S. Eliot who says the perfect...
They're asking to speak up a little more.
I think it was T.S. Eliot who said that the perfect poem combines, is able to detach the mind who thinks of the heart who suffers. And I'm especially in this series of works. So while certainly these works have a more somber tone, and the somber tone is expressed through darkness or through light. Darkness at the Whitney, light in Philadelphia. But you find also a sense of irony, detachment, and play. And also play is pure joy, and play is freedom. So I think that when hopefully what we ended up, the feeling that we ended up by finishing the show, by finishing the process of our work, is a great sense of freedom. And I hope you will have the same. I think
That's it. Everybody who's in this room, if you haven't been to Philadelphia, please go. It really is one show in 2 parts, and you will be very rewarded by your visit there. We loved working with the Philadelphia Museum and Carlos and their teams, and also the context is so exciting. You see these 2 museums which have such different collections and identities despite our shared interest in John's, to be there in the company of Cézanne and Picasso and Duchamp and some of Jasper's heroes. It's just different than seeing this work here in the context maybe of a Whitney biennial or what you remember in the galleries, and physically they're different too. So those 2 contexts, I think, shape one's understanding of the work in beautiful complementary ways.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Brad, hold on 1 second. I just gotta get some information. Brad, 1 second.
We're going to not breathe too much with our mouths off.
Thank you.
Oh, perfect. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Okay, is that man over there?
Oh, this would have been perfect. Did you enjoy it?
I really, really, really enjoyed it so much.
Oh,
It was a great exhibit. I want to know more about Jasper Johns. I'm going to go back and look at my pictures and all the signs. I took pictures of. Bye.